As long ago as 1997, America alone produced 414 billion worth of books, games, music, TV programs, and movies. Since then, the creative products and entertainment IP have continued to be the Western world's #1 export. Today, the total value of the US creative economy is estimated to be $5 trillion. At first, this may seem to be ironic because actually, the creative activities don't have a commercial route. Right up to the beginning of the 20th century, the creative arts were sponsored by patrons. They believed that the black art of creation could only thrive in a non-judgmental and free environment. Even at this early stage, the patrons had grasped the basic principle that people will be more creatively productive if they are unrestrained and so enjoy what they're doing. At this time, truly creative people were seen to be heretics, eccentrics, nonconformists. Well, I guess not a lot's changed over the last 200 years, but the creative process has dramatically changed because it's become a commercial enterprise. Managing creative people is often likened to herding cats because creative people frequently just go off and do their own thing. And this, by default, defines what I do. I would say I'm really a kind of lunatic cat herder. So I joined this industry in 1997 when the creative individual was more like Batman, a loner, nocturnal, often moody and just as hard to find. But now the challenges the industry faces are beyond the reach of one single individual. So we must move to powerful collaborations. Creative teams are now much more like the Avengers. A team of the finest creative minds setting aside their differences for the greater good, as many ideas are often better than one. So this move to teams of specialists collaborating to achieve what once seemed maybe impossible is what prompted me to found Atom Hawk in 2009. Our dream was to work on innovative and challenging creative projects in an environment where creative ideas can flow unhindered. This dream may very well take a lifetime to realize, but let's take a look at what we've managed to achieve so far. So you may have spotted elements from Thor: Dark World and, of course, last year's big Hollywood hit movie, Guardians of the Galaxy. And, you know, I've got to say, this has been just really exciting, like dream come true. However, our journey started almost 6 years ago from a much more humble beginning. So up until 2009, I was the head of art for Midway Games here in the UK. Does anyone remember Midway? It's not that much time has passed, which is good. Midway was one of the world's longest-standing game companies, the creators of Mortal Kombat. They did a whole load of other, retro stuff back in the day. And in 2009, the economic crisis basically put an end to Midway Games, and it went bankrupt. So the development team based in the Team Valley and Gateshead were all laid off. Over 70 staff lost their jobs. So I got together with the best of my creative team, Pete Thompson, Colin Kruger, Steve Pick, and we did what all game developers do in a job loss crisis. We head to the pub. And it was in this humble Gateshead boozer that the four of us hatched our amazing plan, which was to become the go-to design company for the entertainment industry. We would work on the finest games, the biggest movies, and hire only the greatest talent. A grand plan, no doubt helped fueled by several pints of lager. So the first week in August 2009, and we started our new office. The reality was not quite as we'd first fantasized. The office was barely big enough for the four of us. It had bars on the windows. It had a huge Victorian radiator that couldn't be turned off, even though it was August. Also, there was this kind of musty, wet dog smell that we couldn't get rid of. And I started to have flashes of every manager's biggest fear, the personal hygiene conversation. Luckily, it turned out to be the carpet that was damp and not one of the team. So after 2 weeks of sitting there, waiting for the phone to ring, our first project rolled in the form of Driver San Francisco. And shortly after that, we had another amazing big break with Mortal Kombat 9. By the end of that year, we were working on multiple projects. And in 2011, we teamed up with the digital agency Think to win the contract to produce the illustrations for J.K. Rowling's Pottermore. For the rest of 2010, we went from strength to strength and hired a number of great new staff. And in early 2011, we were bizarrely approached by the publisher 3D Total to produce our very first art book, just 18 months after the company had been founded. By the end of that year, we'd grown significantly to 12 staff. And it was at the end of 2011 that the first big movie project came in. Now, I'd love to say that this was some amazing feat of business development, but actually, I just had a random email from a Yahoo account from a chap called Charlie Wood. And in this brief email, he said that he'd found our work online and would like to meet to discuss a new film project he was working on. Now, I seriously thought that this is a time waster, some kind of wind-up, one of my mates, one of our competitors. But I went to London anyway, and lo and behold, it really was the real deal. And 8 months later, the studio had taken another visible leap forward. We now had 16 staff and a brand new office on the Gateshead quayside. And this was not only due to the work we'd been doing through Marvel, but also because we'd been very busy with our games projects. We'd gained key contracts with Sony, Microsoft, and Warner Brothers. And in that first 3 years, we were lucky enough to work on 5 games that charted in the #1 slot. And at the end of 2012, we started working on this. Now, can I ask how many people have seen Guardians of the Galaxy? Oh, that's good. I was going to say we're going to have a spoiler alert, and if you don't want to know how it pans out, you should leave the room now. So Atom Hawk worked on this project for almost a year with a core team of really fantastic concept artists. Again, working with production designer Charlie Wood, who we worked on Thor 2 with, and also this time with James Gunn directing. And this was James Gunn's high-level vision. I've always loved space epics, or space operas, or space adventures as long as I can remember. And this was a chance to make one for today's audience. Guardians of the Galaxy would be about color and life and in-your-face, over-the-top, unrepentant color. Now, I have to say that when we first heard that this was going to be our next project after Thor 2, We all looked at each other and said, Guardians of what? We'd never heard of this obscure part of the Marvel universe, and we ended up having to jump onto Google. And after a short period of time, we learned that this was a fairly niche and unknown comic that had undergone several rebirths over the years, but never really gained any traction. However, once we'd been told that this project would be a blank canvas, we really started to realize that this project was going to allow us to fulfill our full potential. We were to stay away from the references of Blade Runner, Alien, and Logan's Run, focus on the aesthetics from pulpy science fiction films such as Forbidden Planet, Fantastic Voyage, and even Barbarella. We would have an explicitly postmodern palette, contrasting colors and a history of architecture from fantastical galactic cultures. All this, as well as futuristic technology, juxtaposed with the retro design of the 1980s, embodied in Quill's iconic Sony Walkman. Reimagining a universe. Well, where do you start, really? Firstly, we knew that we were going to be doing this the Marvel way, which, as we learned over time, is so different from game development. Most of the AAA console games we've worked on have a budget of around $50 to $100 million to be spent over a period of maybe 3 years, maybe more. While visual development must be done, where it happens in that process has a great degree of flexibility due to a number of key factors, primarily led by the adaptation of agile project management methods. Gameplay can often be mocked up with grey box assets, so it isn't hindered by art. Plus, resources at the end of the production cycle for building 3D models can often be scaled up in order to make up for delays in the concept process. And finally, and sadly, content in games can quite easily be cut. So this means that the concept art stage can usually occupy the first two-thirds of a game development life cycle. For a film like Guardians of the Galaxy, with a production cost of $170 million that's got to be spent in just 18 months, the content of the movie is quantifiable from the start, as the script is the inception point. Actors are one of the biggest costs, and they have to be booked months in advance. Their schedules cannot be altered, and if you try and delay them, there's usually huge financial penalties. Due to the actors' limited availability, there is no room for production to run late. Content cannot be easily cut because we're basically working with a linear storyline. A waterfall project management method is the best way to work in this environment, working back from the key set building dates and filming dates. So in game development, the art director, who is mirrored in the movie industry by the production designer, has quite a lot of time to really think about the style for the project, gather reference, figure out exactly what they want to do. They drive the project way more than they do in movies. For a movie production, the gated process, much like this one, it just doesn't work. If every idea behind every concept hinges on the vision of the production designer, then there very quickly becomes a huge bottleneck. And so a different approach is needed. So during Thor 2, we produced 50 images for just one vehicle design. The goal was to pick one from a wonder wall and essentially consign the other 49 pretty good designs to the cutting room floor. And this is what we call a process of creative convergence. A large team of artists generate different takes on ideas that are then funneled down through iteration to hone the design. As we do this, we have an opportunity to spot a creative gem. And these are the ideas that twinkle as being totally exceptional. This involved giving our team quite a lot of ownership over art direction, allowing us to work autonomously with the production designer setting a high-level goal. He would gather reference together for us, give us a half-an-hour briefing, and then set a time box within which the work must be created. And then pretty much just allowed us to crack on, reviewing the work at maybe bi-weekly intervals. This also means that in many cases we're asked to ask for forgiveness and not permission. This gives us a license to extend existing ideas in order to achieve a concept's goal. But I've got to state that is as long as we hit the deadline. It's the key thing, because if the deadline moves, the whole world comes to an end in movies. Okay, so back to Guardians of the Galaxy. At Atom Hawk, we were mainly responsible for spacecraft design and locations, but all projects have to start somewhere, and so key art images are the perfect tool to express what the vision of the director is going to be to the rest of the production team. And a picture really can paint 1,000 words. It gives the artist a chance to stretch their creativity at the very beginning. We did a series of explorations at the start centered around the young Quill's abduction by space pirates. This type of blue sky image is all about mood without getting stuck in any way on any details. They really do help to hammer out the overall vision and feel of the movie. We designed many craft in the film, but I'll start with possibly the one that was the most iconic, which is Quill, aka Star-Lord's Milano. The Milano is every little boy's dream, a fighter plane / rocket ship. Although real planes and rocket ships tend to be boring and grey, so we looked to the 1940s and 50s for inspiration. Back when a rocket ship could be beautiful and functional. We combined beautiful classic curves with modern materials. And our team worked on this craft for several months and produced literally hundreds of sketches. This is an example of, a really good example of exploring an idea before committing to a final direction, using the combined imagination of a team of artists rather than focusing on the ideas of just one person. And you may be asking, why put so much effort into this particular asset? Well, the Milano is really a character in the film. So much time is spent watching our heroes having conversations in it, and doing battle with enemies on the outside of it, and also great movies that require great design work. I mean, at the end of the day, great design work doesn't come from choosing the first idea that pops into your head. So you have to make sure that you've explored all of the options. So we painted so many versions of this spacecraft that we actually developed a process for rapidly concepting spacecraft ideas. And in our studio, we run what we call learning lunches, which is basically where one of the team, who is an expert in that specific area, will pull together a presentation and teach their process to the rest of the team. So we do a lot of knowledge sharing at Atom Hawk. And I'm going to play you a clip from a video by Roberto Castro on his spacecraft painting process.
And I start to paint on the top, like a new layer shape. This is quite random at the beginning, but when you start painting, you start to see more things, and this part of the spaceship could be like that, or could be like this, or so don't worry at the beginning if it looks like shit. So it's normal. Image like I have some images I take from internet, so most of them are like cars or planes or backgrounds. I'm gonna use probably this one, like a submarine, a British submarine. I'm gonna use this, and I put here, and I create here a clipping mask. So now I can distort this image and try to fit. So now I can create more layers on top and apply again clipping mask. So all these layers are inside this. So it's good because you can play with gradients and lights inside the shape. And the good thing about this is faster, because if you don't create a mask, every photograph you use for the spaceship you have to put and redefine again the shape, the edge of the shape, and put again, and the shape is not clean, and you have to put a new photograph and cut again. So the good thing about this is everything is inside the shape, so we can create a shadow, for example, from here, like multiply mode. So it's good because at any time we can like play with shadows in the spaceship. So this is quite simple environment, but imagine that you have like a city around, so you can play with shadows over the spaceship, so you can move the shadows and see what's the effect and things. So I'm gonna continue adding more images, like I don't know, probably this one, add this here. It's important to know the lighting. The lighting in this case is coming from this side, and it's good as well to use different blending modes to see how new layers affect to the. Sometimes, it's like, oh, this is good or this is bad, but it's not like I don't prefer any in particular. So it's like try with different, and probably you'll find a good one for the painting. So I think it's not a good idea to use many photographs, because it's like a collage at the end. So I think it's good to think about the design of the spaceship and paint over and start to define more things and shadows and how the wings work in this side or what. So now I'm painting like traditional, like a normal speed painting, and you don't need to have a clear idea what are you doing. I mean, it's just start like seeing new ideas. It's like, oh, what happened if I take the eraser, for example, and I make this part thinner and this front wider. So probably you don't need more than 1 hour or 2 hours every spaceship. It's a good idea to find like images like this with nice reflection. So you can cut this part. One is quite cool, I think. Because with 1, 2, 3 hours you can continue add photographs and paint over and finish with a nice image. I think it's important the perspective and the proportion as well when you work with a background, because this is quite simple. It's a background and a shape on top. So always, if you don't control the colors, I think this is a good point to do that in the process. So create a new layer on top with a color or a gradient mark. So now you have all the colors like blend better together, so the image makes more sense about color gradients. And for example, this one would be another nice image. So take this part and see if here, for example, is probably good. The transition between the spaceship and the wing, probably this is a nice bit. So that one probably is nice. So you start to see some reflections. It's good for metal. I use for these views that the spaceship is coming to the camera. I think it's a good idea to use not just motion blur. Probably it's better to use radial blur, so you see this area here more crisp because it's far and it's less movement to the camera, and this area here more blur. So I have to define here the center of the radial blur. So now this is quite nice. Even the shadow is not well done, but now because with the motion blur everything starts to look better. And a bit probably as well on the spaceship. I think to finish it's nice to add some lighting effects at the end, but not many. I'm not a big fan of many lighting effects or lens flare or something, but sometimes it's little one or like subtle is a nice idea. So I think I have one here, this one. And most of the times the best blending mode for lens flare is color dodge add. Let's fix a bit here and small lights and tech on the spaceship. I think this is the final image. Okay. Thank you, thank you.
So often we get supplied with all sorts of unexpected reference materials. And one morning, the production designer sent us a photograph from his shower at home. And I immediately thought, this is something I just don't need to see, whatever it is. However, on more detailed examination, it was luckily just the shower head in his shower. He just looked up, and there was his inspiration, really. And frankly, I am just glad he looked up, because if he'd looked down, he might have been tempted to go with something a bit more obvious. So another great example of the creative convergence process is the work we did on Ronan's ship, the Darkaster. Now, the process started with some pretty wacky and out there ideas. This one, for example, I mean, we loved the scale of this. The Darkaster needed to look like a planet destroyer, but this also it's like something out of an anime cartoon. So it wasn't really the right feel for Guardians of the Galaxy. And as these images were steadily honed and refined through a funnel-like process, we started to get closer to the final idea. So with this one, I mean, we found this really interesting. This crab-like shape is quite unique, but it almost has too much character. You know, this ship needs to seem ominous and kind of almost faceless. And so this wasn't quite right either. But what we did like was the repetitive surface details. With this one, we liked the asymmetrical shape and the industrial feel. It felt both ancient and mechanical. But on review, it kind of looked a bit too much like the spacecraft from Prometheus. This design had a great, ominous and faceless shape, plus some interesting geometric repetition in the surface details. And all of these elements are fed down at each stage into the final design. Now, the final monolithic, unstoppable craft took references from cathedrals, submarines, aircraft carriers, brutalistic concrete buildings, and all supersized up on an epic scale. I mean, you can see here that the Darkaster is dwarfing the Empire State Building here on the left-hand side. And this ultimate design was produced by an artist called Paul Catling, with the final rendering being done by Pete Thompson. The Necrocraft are the fighters that are housed inside the Darkaster, and they feature prolifically in battle scenes against the Milano. And we needed to produce something as unique as the Darkaster itself. So these craft would need to fly like insects with the agility of a fly and be able to turn way faster than any normal craft. So the design ethics are the total opposite to the Milano. We went with a narrow body, low-slung wings, and a V formation to create the impression of almost like an upside-down insect. And unlike a game where the final asset is virtual, most of the craft needed to be built as either a partial set or a full set. Our artists needed to create very precise drawings that were almost architectural quality, and this allows the set builders to really understand what they're trying to achieve. Now, this is, however, quite unusual because also in film, concepts are normally designed to just look good to camera. So if you think in a game development scenario, you're building a 3D model, and often the game world is, you can move all around it, and you can look at objects from every angle. For movies, all they care about is that the side that's going to be to the camera looks good. So quite often, you might not even bother to design the other side of an object. It's just literally what's going to be seen on screen. And that's quite a challenge for someone who's been working in game development, because I think we like, in games, to understand what the story is. We like to think about the history of the object and how it was designed, which is very different from the fast-paced design world of movies. Now, I was very lucky to get to go and visit the set of Guardians of the Galaxy while it was partway through production. And I got to see the Milano for real, which they built as a 1.5, I think it was a $1.5 million set. But it was there in a hangar, like the real thing. And I was amazed to be invited to go inside. And it was just, the level of detail was incredible. They'd used real materials everywhere they could. And instead of, normally in movies, everything's made out of MDF with plaster molding applied on top of it, this was nearly all the real deal. And even the seats in the cockpit had been trimmed by the company that trimmed seats for Bentley. So it was out of this world seeing something go from being sketches in our studio to being, this amazing spacecraft sitting in a hangar. As well as key art and spacecraft, my team also visualized a number of memorable locations from the film, starting with the maximum security prison, the Kiln. Again, using the same convergence process to rapidly generate ideas at the start. This process also has the benefit of purging any creative preconceptions that the artists might have lurking in their mind. And once they've exhausted all of the obvious, that's when the unusual and innovative starts to appear. As interesting as some of these concepts were, none had the permanency and iconic shape as the final one. Our lead artist worked directly with the production designer in coming up with this very heavy, ominous shape that also has a feeling of familiarity. Reminiscent of a kind of space Alcatraz, but instead of being surrounded by deep flowing water, this is surrounded by a deadly asteroid field. And having finalized what the exterior would look like, every detail of this location was then meticulously planned, even down to how the NovaCorp transporter will interface with the prison. I mean, this shot was probably seen on screen like that. It just flipped by, but the amount of attention to detail they go into is incredible. The Kiln even featured its own ship-breaking yard where the Milano would be impounded. And the interior of the prison was actually built as a physical set. The movie needed to feature hundreds of actors in cells and a load of action. And actually, I'm really glad they did go with a physical set for this, because really it brings so much more life to the scene. The actors are in a physical location, and I think it just brings out a little bit better performance in the scene for them, because they're able to feel and understand what it's like to actually be in that location. So in this particular scene, the set was extended using CG. So at the lower levels, I think it was 38 feet tall, and then they added the rest of the height above the tower with green screen. And the physical set used 350,000 pounds of steel in weight. It's an American stat. As usual, every detail was meticulously planned, even down to how the cell doors would look and how they would function. Probably the most iconic location that we worked on was the giant floating head of a long since expired celestial being called Nowhere. The head, now orbiting a black hole, supports a mining colony that is steadily extracting the very valuable spinal fluid. And as you can imagine, this was a really tough one to get right. We went through many design iterations, and also the balance between tech and organic was in constant debate. It needed to feel techy, but it also needed to have mummified bone and flesh underneath it. Inside the giant head, entered by the docking bay in one of its eye sockets, is a city. This city needed to feel like an ancient civilization. And so we looked at references from both the ancient and developing worlds. We wanted to capture the feeling of the new being built on top of the old, structures that were intended to be temporary being used for decades, all under a thick and potentially hazardous industrial smog. This city also needed to feel like it had some history. So since the building architecture needed variation and layering of different eras, a lot of thought goes into devising not only what an alien architecture might look like, but also what its evolution might have been throughout the centuries. And once inside, our heroes do what heroes do best, and they head straight to the bar. The boot of Jemaya is a really dangerous place full of all sorts of galactic scumbags doing dodgy deals. And in the center of this bar is a gambling table with a game that involves running small rodent creatures around a table while the gamblers trigger various traps to capture them. And in order to design this table, we spent quite a lot of time actually thinking about how this game might play out, just to give it that extra level of realism. Because I think if somebody just asks you to design a game, it's very difficult to get that right. So again, the amount of attention to detail going into little things that are just seen very briefly on screen was immense. And the ultimate goal of the Nowhere location is for our heroes to meet the collector in his museum. And I say museum because this is actually what this scene started off as looking like. It was going to be an old world, dusty, with a little bit of decay and grandeur in there to give it a little bit of awe-inspiring element to it. But sadly, once we'd produced that concept, it then seemed implausible that the collector's high-tech lab equipment would be housed there. And so we had to revisit the design to give it a more sci-fi look. And this set was actually largely done as a computer-generated environment, because at the end of this scene, they blow it to pieces. So it made sense. And the heroes then escape via the pod garage. This is where some of the industrial mining pods are housed. And bizarrely, this physical set was absolutely tiny. I mean, you might probably better see this here, but the set was literally this object here and this plinth here, and everything else in the movie was all added via green screen. I was really lucky, actually. I again, got to go out and see the final object. So I went out to Comic-Con last year, and the pod itself was constructed via pieces of, it was almost like a kit printed on a 3D printer. So they printed all of these sections out and then glue them together and then paint them. And again, like, craftsmanship was out of this world. Even just a meter away, it looked real. It was only when you got really close to it that you could see that it was painted. Absolutely incredible. So I'm almost at the end of my galactic slideshow, but I have just one more to show you, and that's the Battle for Xandar, which we created a number of key action shots of the Milano fighting with the pirate craft alongside them. So what I've shown here today are really just the highlights. The sheer amount of concept work that goes into bringing a movie like this to the screen is absolutely staggering. With the movie and AAA games industries on a steady path of conversions, I really do believe that it's only a matter of time before the game art concept process is going to have to start taking some of this movie methodology on. In fact, we've already as a company been entrusted by a small number of pioneering AAA space companies to work with us to provide visual development for their games, where the ownership of art direction is being split between their internal team and us as their creative partner. So at Atom Hawk, we're aiming to be the Avengers of the art world, a team of the finest creative minds, setting aside our differences for the greater good. And as we strive to do this, we work hard to manage, measure, communicate, and control. But fundamentally, it's our love of the craft, our love of dressing up, and our ideas that drive our quality in a business where creative quality can really be the only measure of success. So does anyone have any questions? Hello.
Hi. I love the term commit. You said you go through this evolution of you then commit. Often games don't commit and change happens.
Yeah.
What's the reality? How often do you let changes happen after you've committed?
In the movie industry, it has to be designed in that window. So the window will literally be, this has to be done in this 2-week period. And whatever, like the production designer will say, okay, I want to review this in the first week, maybe 2-3 times. And then in the second week, you're going to deliver everything that you've got by, say, Wednesday. And on Friday, he's going to be in a room with a director, and they're going to pick which one is the one that they go for the scene. So having come from games myself, I was an art director in the games industry for I've been in the industry 20 years, and I've been an art director for 10. I was much more used to having that time to think about what I'm doing and maybe change direction, maybe eventually get there. Whereas with the movie industry, it's either what you have in that 2-week period is what's going to go in the movie. And the challenge there is they basically just hire the best people because they know that if they've got the best people, the chances of what happens in that 2-week window is going to be pretty good. But that's why you see so many films that are in some ways not that great. And as a games art director, you look at it and you go, well, why didn't they just sort that out? And it's because there was no time. They just literally go, bang, 2 weeks, whatever's there in the film. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, do you think film will evolve to become more iterative?
No, and I think if anything, AAA games are going to have to become more like films, because as the budgets go up, it's not sustainable to be making these massive games over 3 or 4 years. Really, from a commercial point of view, the pressure is going to become, it's going to be on us to develop these games in 18 months to 2 years. And so we're going to have to, in some ways, let go of some of the control. And believe me, as an art director, if you'd asked me 5 years ago, I'd have been terrified by this process. But actually, if you've got good artists, then why not? You've got all these great heads around you, all these brilliant minds. Empower them to come up with the great ideas and really just be the filter. Just make sure that the right stuff is making its way through that funnel. Cool. Yeah, sure.
Didn't you end up creating anything that didn't make it into the movie? Obviously you did concepts that didn't make it into the movie,
Yeah.
but didn't you deliver some final stuff that they said, this is not what we at all wanted?
No, actually, there were moments, obviously, where there were moments, obviously, where certain things didn't make it into the movie just because of running time or the director decided to make an edit. But Guardians of the Galaxy, like Thor, was probably 30% of the stuff that we thought had been signed off and gone in the movie wasn't in it, because they did a major story rewrite after they'd done a lot of the filming. Guardians of the Galaxy was almost concept for concept spot on. It was incredible. And that's really, I think, down to James Gunn's vision as a director. He kind of, I really think in his mind, he could see the whole thing, how it was going to pan out. And so because his vision was very clear, there wasn't a great deal of wastage there. Go ahead. Sure, I think you had your hand up as well, yeah?
Hi. Thinking about that pyramid where you're developing an idea, so lots of people starting, lots of different ideas, and then you sort of narrowed it down to that sort of gem at the bottom. So say there were 6 artists all coming up with different ideas, as you sort of get closer to where you think it should be, would all 6 artists be in that process right to the end?
No,
or do you
probably
find
not.
that the one that you like, or by that artist, they tend to develop it through and the others
Yeah.
move on?
Yeah, you find that, and it's through no sort of, I mean, what we find in our studio is, on one task, it'll be one person who'll just nail it almost in the first couple of iterations, and you'll be like, they get it, and so they'll own that, and normally through that funnel, you've got 6, you go to 4, you go to 3, you go to 2, you go to 1, or maybe it just goes 6 to 2 to 1, depending on how good that flow's gone. But it's different people every time, and you normally find that in a concept team, while we sort of like to have a team where everybody's pretty good at everything, everybody's a little bit better at a certain thing that they really love. And so you can almost be sure that the 2 guys in the studio who love doing vehicles, if you give them a vehicle thing, they'll be the last 2 guys on that funnel. So, and sometimes you get surprised, but yeah.
It seems like creativity is very obviously key to what you do, and you said you had like learning lunches and stuff like that. What other things did you do to foster that atmosphere, just to keep it going? Because you constantly have to make new stuff,
Yeah, one of the artists I founded the company with, Colin Kruger, actually, once he came into work and he sat at his desk and he looked at his screen and he went, "It's 9 a.m. Be creative." And he was like sort of trying to psych himself up, but it's true. But what I think, collaboration between artists is one of the most powerful driving forces. So artists love looking at each other's work. There's always a bit of competition, healthy competition. And when somebody does something that somebody else can't figure out how they've done it, there's straight away a conversation of, how did you do that? Because everybody wants to get those ideas from each other. And so what we've found is having a lot of visibility between all the different teams is really important. So we do things like we have a thing called the Wall of Awesome, which is basically every week the top 10 images that have been made in the studio are sent round as an email link, and everybody in the team votes on their favorite 2. So what that does is it shows everybody in the studio visibility of what everybody else is working on. And then in the studio meeting, I then announce, which two won. So that's great because it kind of propagates visibility between the teams.
You said the director's vision was very clear. How did you extract that image and propagate it to your artists?
Well, when I say vision, a director, some directors are very visual, but most directors are focused on story. So what I mean by that is the better described the story is, the easier it is as a concept artist, because we would get literally a page of script and you would see a section highlighted in pink, and the section in pink is the scene that you're going to be designing. So the quality of that description is key. And the other thing is in the meetings where the director's reviewing the work, his ability to sort of communicate what he feels about that image is also very important. So we've all worked, I'm guessing a lot of people here have been artists at some point. We've all worked with a good lead artist who's able to tell you what he wants from the work, and we've all worked with a bad lead artist who kind of goes, maybe just make it better. And you're like, great, thanks. And so it's really about that. And the problem is the director's got to have so many skills. He's got to be able to communicate about audio. He's got to be able to communicate about visuals. He's got to be able to communicate about stories, like actors' performance. It's very hard, I think, to find a director who can do all of those things. And so as a result, every production's got a slightly different strong point depending on what the strong point of that director is.
Does that mean it then falls more to the script writer to communicate?
Yeah, if the script's good, and also the conversations between the production designer and the director. If the production designer and director are in really good sync, then you find that the reference material that he's gathering to give to you, because we do get ref packs, but it's not like in the games industry where you get a ref pack that might be like, here is a landscape, we want this here, we want that there, which is almost getting to the point of being like painting by numbers maybe a little bit, where you're being told exactly what this image should be. Whereas with those guys, they're like for Thor, for example, the Asgardian skiff, which is like a Viking longboat, the only reference we got for that was, here is a Viking longboat, we really like this, can you make this work as a spaceship? And that was basically it. So you've got 1 or 2 images as ref and a verbal make it work as a spaceship, and then the rest is up to us, which is really cool, really empowering for the artists in particular. Sure.
Hi. It sounds like you had a lot of creative freedom then in the concept stage. Did you slip in any Easter eggs that made it through into the final production designs?
No, sadly not.
You didn't get your logo in there or anything on one of the spaceships?
No.
Oh, a shame.
No, I know, it's gutting. But that's the other thing is, as I was saying, everything's designed to camera, which, I think it's good and it's not, it isn't. I think a lot of artists, the spark is there where you just want to create something. And I think that the movie industry is really good for that spark, because you get to just paint a really quick painting to camera, and if it's great, that's it. Whereas in games, I think a lot of people like to, there's more of that kind of airfix mentality going on, where you want to design this perfect thing that has all the details. Yeah, no, sadly not. Sure.
Does the filming process, because as you iterate or use the work, do you have a problem dealing with egos and discipline?
Definitely. I think it's hard for anyone to sort of, like the Milano, I think I showed in that slide here. Let me just trick back to this one. Okay. So the Necrocraft, 63 designs of that craft before we got to the final one. And it starts to become a marathon at that point. And it's only a matter of time before that artist just gets up and goes, screw this, screw you guys, and just get fed up. So what we try and do is we try and move people around a little bit. So instead of just saying, right, you're on the Necrocraft for the next 4 months, it will be like you're working on the Necrocraft and this and this. And in that time, hopefully you can chop and change a little bit just to give a bit of sanity to people. So that is one of the things that isn't good, I would say, about the movie industry model, is all this iteration does burn artists out. There's a big risk of that, and we've become much more aware as a management team of trying to manage that burnout to ensure that it doesn't happen. We done? I'm done. Thanks, folks. Cheers. Thanks for coming. Thank you.